I believe a game that is designed from the very beginning to be an infinite game, to show the power of cooperation over competition, is going to be what is necessary to quite literally gamify every aspect of our world's transformation. The stories we tell are the front line of transformation. We can recognize that one of the most powerful points of intervention we can create is the birthing of a new story.
Welcome, everyone. It is a joy to be joining you from Bali, where I am back to present at the Bali Spirit Festival, which I have to say is one of my favorite places to teach in the world. The people that gather, the creativity of the team, and the energy of this island always comes together to bring something special. I will be offering a workshop on unlocking intuition. We each have this great intelligence within us that the dominant culture has not taught us how to use or honored. We will be unlocking the powers of your intuition, both for your own personal guidance and to lead us into a beautiful collective future. We will explore how intuition can serve us now as we live through grief and uncertainty with the challenges we face globally. This is very in line with the theme of this week's podcast, and being in Bali opened up an opportunity to take part in the Up.Games and journey into the future to co-create our planetary thriving. My guest today is Lucian Tarnowski, the founding curator of United Planet and UP.Game. United Planet is a community creating the better world our hearts know is possible. The UP.Game is a time-traveling immersive reality to create mythologies from the United Planet. Lucian spent 2 years designing a platform for a planetary unifying narrative to respond to the meta-crisis of meaning and narratives. This mission is to deliver on the decade of transformation and seed the vision for a Gaian movement towards a planetary civilization in harmony with all life. Lucian believes we succeed by reverse engineering the story from the future. He is a Gaian on a mission to serve the birthing of the planetary age. He has a decade of experience in designing and powering online communities that connect diverse stakeholders around a shared purpose. Communities support virtual and distributed teams to scale and achieve their collaboration, knowledge sharing, and problem-solving goals. For 10 years, he was founder and CEO of Brave New, which enabled Fortune 1000 clients such as GE and collaboratives such as Institute for Healthcare Improvement and Gaian Health to cooperate and collaborate around a shared purpose. He has been honored as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. He's been an active attendee of Davos and other World Economic Forum meetings for 15 years. He continues to research and experiment around the social science behind communities, knowledge sharing, and societal transformation. Since 2002, he has run Take Heart India, a 53-year-old no-overheads charity started by his father that provides blind and handicapped people in rural India with the vocational employment skills required to get lifelong employment. In this conversation called Reverse Engineering a Thriving Future, we explore the themes of decentralisation, applied intuition, and AI technology as we speak to the question, how can we utilise human potential and new technologies to create a thriving civilization in harmony with all life? We hope that you enjoy this conversation and it invokes in you more audacious vision and embodied possibility for our futures. Welcome to All That We Are with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration. The spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community, or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Lucian, it is a delight to sit down with you after we have shared this 10 days together to bring you to all that we are, to share your vision and everything that you are creating.
Such a delight. Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here. And I'm excited for this conversation.
What does it mean to you if I ask you, what are the futures of your wildest dreams? What comes up for you there?
You know, I get asked that a lot with the UP.Game, and there are so many examples of futures I can give. I take a kind of systematic approach to it, where I break it down into 4 elemental categories and then 16 pillars within each of the elements. But I start with a simpler answer, which is what I call the planetary hat trick. Hat trick because both in a sense of a magician's hat trick, but also scoring a goal, 3 goals in football. That is number 1. That is a new planetary language. I believe that language is hiding in plain sight as a way to show us pathways to a thriving future through the way we relate to the world around us. My father once wrote me a letter where he said language is the unwitting culprit, in that for words to be intelligible, they must separate us from the world around us. So when we describe a chair or a door or a bed or a leaf, we actually remove the life from that which we're describing. And so I've been thinking a lot about how could we use language to do a quantum jump on the way we communicate. And so for me, a positive future could be a language that reinforces our identity as citizens of the planet, as Gaians, as we describe in United Planet. That will be a language that transcends words. Yes, it can have words, but it can go way beyond words, and it could use every sense of our being, use all of our motions, use our capacities, whether it be telepathy or capacities that we might have that we don't really fully understand how to use yet. You know, applied intuition in ways that right now are not popularly aware in the way I believe they will be in the future. It's also a language that could be what we call polychronic, in that it's not bound by time in the way that language is currently understood, in that we can open up channels to communicate with the past and the future using our language. And so in United Planet, we call this language Gaian. And it's a language that I can see can be used to create more of a collective identity and a shared mission, a sense of belonging, because language has always played that role. It's like a deep expression of culture. We see the Gaian language as a way to connect us to the sense that we are all Gaians living on Gaia, communicating in Gaian. So even the fact that we choose to use the same word for ourselves, for all life on the planet, for the birds and the bees and the trees and the whales and the dolphins, as well as for the planet herself, for Gaia, that's very intentional, that we've come from this age of being very human-centric, and we need to evolve beyond that because it's not creating the cultures that leads to intergenerational wellness and planetary thriving. And so I think language is one of those aspects, I would say, first of all. And there's a lot there, you know, with Gaian. How can we decode the language of the whales, the language of the dolphins, the language of trees and plants, so that we can expand our horizons of communication beyond being so human-centric and actually beyond nations, because I believe nations have been part of the problem more than part of the solution. And so there's a lot more we'll discuss on that, but that's the first one. The second one is a game. You know, back in 1961, the great Buckminster Fuller, great visionary of the regeneration and the design science decade that he predicted, he was an inventor and really a true visionary of our time. He said there would come a decade where every aspect of our world would be gamified to work for 100% of all life. I was really inspired by that vision that he set out in 1961 with the World Game. And that's really was one of the inspiring starting points of the UP.Game, was how would we gamify every aspect of our world so that we design it from the beginning to work in harmony with all life? And so I really do believe that it's not going to be creating the future of our society in boardrooms like Davos. I believe it's going to be a game that 1 billion people, 1 billion Gaians will be participating in, a plus that will gamify every aspect of our society's transformation and every aspect of our planet's transformation so that we can actually play the infinite game rather than the finite game. And just to break that down, it's the distinction between a game where there's winners and losers, and the purpose of the game is to win at someone else's expense of them needing to be a loser in it, to an infinite game where the goal is to keep the game playing, to keep it playing for all life. So we describe this in the UP.Game as we win when we all win, and we're playing for all, because I really do believe this age of duality and separation has been so toxic to our thriving. And the age of competition has won in the present system at the expense of planetary cooperation. And so I believe a game that is designed from the very beginning to be an infinite game, to show the power of cooperation over competition, is going to be what is necessary to quite literally gamify every aspect of our world's transformation such that anybody with the capacity to redesign, rethink, reimagine, and ultimately put into action their vision can participate in it in a way that is playful, in a way that's celebratory, in a way that is taking a lot of the seriousness and the complexity out of how we deal with systemic challenges and putting us into a state of childlike wonder where through play and celebration, we can achieve our fullest potential. So that's number 2. And then number 3 leads into that. It's this culture of celebration. It's creating deep community through a sense of belonging and a sense of planetary identity. And so that's why when we started United Planet, before we even had the name, we started by throwing celebrations of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I believe there will be celebrations all around the world that will reconnect us back to community, back to our common unity. And that creating the world we want to see is very linked to us celebrating that which we're going to do. Because celebration is the highest vibration. It puts us into a state of wonder where we can synchronize our left and right brains, where we can synchronize our heartbeats, where we can get into a place of what we in the UP.Game call harmonic flow. And it's in that state where I think we're at our best, where we can tackle the challenges that are deeply rooted and systemic, because we can rise above the symptoms and get into the root causes. So number 1, language. Number 2, game and gamification. And number 3, celebration and creating a culture of celebrating the positive narratives of transformation, as opposed to being conquered by dystopia.
Thank you for that vision. I have been asking people a version of this question since 2010. What is the future you choose? How can we co-create a beautiful future? What are the futures of your wildest dreams? And nobody has ever given me a 3-point answer that is so connected to everything that you're doing. And I want to honor that for a minute, because what I have found in asking this question to so many people, and often people that are really on a mission, is that visioning is really hard. And that I have been really surprised by people that, I thought I can see their vision really clearly. And then when I ask them, they're like, yeah, how do you distill that into words? Or how do you have the worth and the, I want to say audacity to say things can be a completely different way, and I can see it, and here are some steps that we can take. And so I just want to say that, it's really special that you're bringing that into our world, into our communities, and that you've spent time because I do feel that vision really anchors us somewhere. And as I've experienced in the Up Games, it anchors us into a place in the future where we have already done what we wanted to do.
Where we are what we wish to be already. I think that's key. No, I mean, thank you. I've lived a very privileged life. My father was an amazing visionary, very ahead of his time. And my mother was, very much a very humble servant to the community around her and many people that loved her. And so I had really incredible parents that raised me with, I've never not known that every aspect of our world can be redesigned. It's been an awareness for me, and since I was a child. So I don't remember a kind of moment where I was like, oh, I'm on a mission here in this world. Even as my earliest memories as a child, I felt I was here for a reason, and I felt empowered to pursue that. I've never felt like I needed to make compromises. And that is true privilege. That is true understanding that I was born with, with an enormous amount of privilege in just who my parents were and how worldly they both were, but also their friends around them with, my adopted grandfather being Baba Amte in India, the protege of Gandhi and one of the most famous social workers ever to live in India. I was very, very privileged to be raised by people that didn't see the current status quo as needing to be what the future holds. And so for me, it was always an awareness of knowing that the world is not worthy of ourselves. It's frankly beneath us. It's incredibly poorly designed. It's, most people are pursuing jobs to make the rich richer, really at the expense of the collective and at the planet. And I was aware of that from such a young age. But like many of us are aware of that. Many of us see the inequalities in the world. The Edelman Trust Barometer shows that 4 out of 5 people on the planet believe the current system isn't working. But even more worrying is 2 out of 3 people in the world believe the future is going to be even worse than the present. In that recognition of the failure of this existing system leads to a lack of hope and a lack of optimism that I believe ends up creating that dystopic world that we are looking to rise beyond. And so for me, I realized that one of the most important things I could have, and that I take very seriously how I cultivate and develop on a day-to-day practice, is what I describe as childlike faith, that there is a place where we've done it, where if I can imagine it, if I can see that world can exist, that what Charles Eisenstein calls the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, that seed, that more beautiful world that exists in so many of our hearts and imaginations, I believe because we can imagine it, it means that not only it can exist, but it does exist on the timeline. And so then the question is, how can we not be conquered by the predominant narrative and the age of separation that is the dystopic narrative of our future, that is that AI is going to take over everybody's jobs and ultimately destroy the world, that nuclear weapons are going to get into the hands of people that are going to create, a world just really unsafe for future generations, that our climate catastrophe is going to really just limit the future of our generation, the future of our descendants. It's not that one is blind about the reality of the world. That this is not a children's revolution. This is about having childlike faith in the possibility of transformation. Because often people underestimate how much we can transform and how fast culture transforms. And so for me, this is about how can we intelligently use narratives as the front line, recognizing that narratives, there is nothing more important in our world than a well-told story of how we can transform our world into the world we wish to see. So for me, this is something where I feel very connected to a collective potential that I hold with a vision that we can and will and have come together to realize that vision.
Powerful.
It is. It's actually, there's a beautiful word for this. It's called hyperstition. Very few people know about this concept, but hyperstition you can measure it. It's a scientifically measurable phenomenon. And what it is basically when a group of people share a worldview, they share a belief system, that group of people create the feedback loops, the positive feedback loops that accelerate that vision into reality. So they quite literally manifest their worldview into reality by sharing that belief system. And so I think this is how, Margaret Mead, who said, never underestimate the power of a small group of citizens to change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. This is hyperstition in action. When we as a community of Gaians say, actually, we're not going to be conquered by dystopia. We're not going to let the predominant narrative of fear and separation and have and have-nots and nations and in or out and us and them and left and right and wrong separate us, but we're going to transcend beyond that and recognize in that transcendence, in that unity space, that is where the power lies to create that at scale. So, many of us applying this in our own lives already. We're creating vision boards. We're creating our goals that we want to manifest. Even New Year resolutions is an example of this. But what I noticed is that we're not really applying that at the collective level. So the thing that we're doing in our own lives to envision our future and go and manifest it into reality, to go and create positive psychology, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, that we're doing in our own lives, we're missing the opportunity to do that as a collective. And Carl Jung showed that the collective is a mirror to the individual. And so if it works for an individual, highly likely it's going to work for the collective. And so for me, I started to think, well, what is the collective sport? What is the collective practice of envisioning the future, of manifesting the future? What is collective NLP? Collective positive psychology, collective storytelling such that we go and create that future. And so I spent many years kind of studying and experimenting, quite literally running thousands of experiments to say, what could it take to create an engine that would be a dream engine, a storytelling engine, or what I love to call a commons wealth engine that creates a flywheel to start with the narrative as the front line and then create the feedback loops to turn that narrative into reality.
And now you've been playing with these experiments for a number of years.
Yeah, in some sense, I would say most of my career I've been experimenting. I started an IT and English language school in India. I fundraised, set up for the foundation my father started in 1964 called Take Heart, which works with the world's largest community in India around leprosy and disability. I started experimenting there with my father when I was like 9 years old, and then took over the running of that foundation when I was 18, and then started to experiment with new transformations in the future of education. Started an IT and English language school when I was at university. And then I spent 10 years running a digital community platform where over that 10 years I was involved in the design of something like 1,000 multi-stakeholder communities. So I saw so many different examples, and we powered communities for the largest community on the internet for veterans, and supported 20,000 military vets transition from the military into civilian jobs. And we powered many of the largest communities around healthcare reform, where we connected over 600 stakeholders that represent 100 million people around population health transformation. And over the years of running this digital community platform, which was really a social learning platform, it was a place to bring different stakeholders together to share knowledge so that they can achieve their common purpose. Over the years, that was essentially a kind of experimental engine for how we can create the future we want to see. And in that work, I started going to Davos really young. I was like 23, 24 when I first went to Davos back in 2008. And I got exposed from a very young age, the cockpit of the current leadership system. See what I mean by that? the big swinging dicks.
I'm familiar with that cockpit.
Exactly. And what I realized is I was like, wow, the world is run by a smaller number of people than I realized. And those people have really got their own agendas in the driving seat. They don't really have a plan. I don't believe in the conspiracy theories that Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum is like got this evil agenda to control the world. I don't believe that that's going on. But what I do believe is that they are proponents. They have risen to the top of the extractive system that is not designed for intergenerational thriving. And it's almost like to be the best in the extractive capitalist system, you disqualify yourself from being a designer of what's coming next, because the cultures are radically different. It's like command and control versus team of teams. And so what I realized is that when you can see that the world is a house of cards, that the systems we have are not fit for purpose, whether it be nation states or the way corporations are rewarding their own value creation with profits. What I could see was that the world was a house of cards. And I began to realize not to look to the people at the top of the pack to pull the bottom out, because they have the longest to fall. And when you can see that there's a collapsing system, you can see that the people that are currently in power are actually so frightened of that collapsing system. They're doing everything in their power to propagate status quo. And so what ends up happening is, if where we need to go as a planet is north and where we're going is south, at best they're tweaking the current system that really take us to south-southwest. And so we massively miss the mark. And you can see this every year in different Davos meetings, in now I go to UNGA every year, go to COP every year. And I feel this is like a symptom of the world we've created, where we're not taking the risks, which I actually don't see as risks. I see it as, if we continue with the status quo, we're risking the whole picture. But the current power structures are propagating the system that we have, even knowing that we've kind of got the collective equivalent of stage 4 cancer. We're just pumping the body with like opioids and creating, for example, just take quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is precisely the opioid crisis of economics. Nations are just hit Uncle Sam, hitting up with more printing of money at the cost of devaluing everyday people's savings. A lot of people don't understand, because they're so understandably caught up in their own race for survival in the current system, that they can't see the big picture of how crazy and how unfair and how, they may know that the world is unjust, but they can't see that it's actually been designed and propagated that way. And that actually there are far more simple solutions that can get us to a culture of intergenerational and planetary thriving. And so that's where I feel, it's like we've created this culture where so many people have become experts in their field, where they're to be employable, they become quite narrow in a particular field. They become a specialist in a particular field. And so what's happened is the generalists, what in the Renaissance people would describe as Renaissance people, that were incredibly well read and well traveled and could see so many different aspects of society. We've kind of let that slip in a way, in that we don't prize it in the same way. So fewer people are seeing the big picture and thereby connecting the dots, becoming the synthesizers, becoming what I describe as the planetary fascia, the connective tissue that can actually see that there is a better way, that it doesn't need to be like this. And that rather than being, if I can use the analogy of bricks and mortar, that specialists are like the bricks that, to build a house, you need bricks, but we've forgotten the mortar. We've forgotten the connective tissue. We've forgotten to reward the people and the organizations that are the connective tissue designing what can come next and designing a world that isn't at risk of extinction.
Absolutely. When we exist in silos, we just create disconnection.
Absolutely.
And this really is the time of the great weaving of something that is holistic and that is inclusive. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to create something different that's going to bring us into that place of thriving and into that place of connection and actually allow us to live a life on this planet that we would imagine and we would hope for our children as possible.
Absolutely. And it's so close. It's so close. Like I feel this giant regenerative wave, the regeneration. I feel it coming this decade. And so many of us are not seeing it. They're not seeing how much capital is about to transform into the regenerative movement. Because it's like, how can one compete with something that is true versus something that's false? So many of the stories we tell ourselves are not good. They're not wholesome. They don't lead to thriving, happy lives. The American dream is hollow. It's so aspirational, such that, it's like that Fight Club quote. People do jobs they don't enjoy to buy shit they don't need to impress people they don't like. And that is just being propagated. And if you look at like how we celebrate millionaires and billionaires and celebrities, we have got it so wrong. And yet I know that when people taste what it is to have like locally grown organic food, that they're connected to their food, it tastes so much better. So I know that when people realize what is actually on offer, what is the promise of the regeneration, it's hard to compete with, because cooperation will outperform competition. And that so many of us know that extractive capitalism is at the very end of its life. Something way better is coming, provided we can create that connective tissue, provided that we cannot be conquered by the dystopian narrative, and provided we don't, let it be acceptable that our world is run by monopolistic nation states that are playing a zero-sum game and reinforcing this win-lose narrative where nobody wins.
I love what you're saying about being able to feel the regeneration. And I'm sat here not being able to feel that because I've just been in a really difficult season of life the last few years and have not been necessarily surrounding myself, even with hosting this show, with the people that maybe are holding those seeds. And I can see how easy it is to slip into that space of survival and busyness and heaviness. And I would love for everyone that's listening that is feeling in that place, for you to share what you see is happening and what you see is possible from where we are right now.
So the first thing is, I know in every cell of my being that Gaia has got an intelligence, that we're not just on a kind of molten rock floating in space, that there is a collective intelligence at play, and that I believe there are humans, there are Gaians, there are individuals that are finding each other, that are quite literally what I describe as a planetary immune system response. So if you think about your own human body and you think about how your immune system works, when there's an infection, your T cells will work together, they'll come together, they'll run different code scenarios, they'll run different algorithms, if you like. They'll experiment very rapidly on how to fight that infection. And then when one T cell breaks through and it works, they'll rapidly share with the other T cells the codes, and then all of the T cells come together and they will fight that infection. And our immune system is remarkable. The way our white blood cells work, the way our whole immune system works. We are a whole system, and we are an intelligent system. As above and so below, the planet is exactly the same. And I believe that we are planetary T cells, that we quite literally are an immune system response. And that there is an intelligence at play that is working through us, and that our intelligence isn't just remaining in our heads. What's happening to us isn't just remaining in our bodies. When we break through the traumas that we hold as individuals, we can do it on behalf of the collective. That we're not just siloed as individuals. When we elevate our own frequency, when we rise in our consciousness, we're not just doing it on behalf of ourselves. We're doing it but on behalf of the collective. And so when you start with that point, it actually gives you a deeper sense of motivation to say, like, I'm going to go through this because I'm not just doing it for myself. It's so important I go through this and through the fire, this too shall pass, because I'm going through it on behalf of the planet, on behalf of Gaia, on behalf of all life, and not just life alive today, all future generations. And so, for me, this is a core part of my faith. It's a core part of the starts from is the planet is alive. We are alive with it. We are interacting in this great system in the same way as cells and organs and different functions in our body have different purposes. We not only can, but have created that future we wish to see. This is where I'd love to bring time in, because I believe that time is one of those aspects that is hiding in plain sight as one of the greatest tools to reimagine our world. When Einstein talks about space-time continuum, I think space gets too much airtime. We're talking a lot about, think about how much money we're putting into the space industry with SpaceX, etc. There's very little going into reframing our relationship to time. And so time is a dimension, it's the fourth dimension. And most people are thinking in 3 dimensions. They're thinking about this reality. And they have been, if you like, conquered by a relationship to time, where time is the master. We are the, if you like, the participant. As I intentionally use the master-slave crisis here in relationship to time, in that so many of us in the world have been deeply conditioned to an unquestioned relationship to time, that this time is all there is for me to experience. And it's not true. What Einstein said, that the distinction between the past, present, and future is nothing more than a stubbornly persistent illusion. And so when we recognize the true nature of time, that it's a dimension, and that when we look at what we could call quantum time in the quantum nature of reality, that everything that ever has taken place, everything that ever is taking place, and everything that ever will take place is all happening in the deep now. It's all happening in this moment. And what I liken here is that if you imagine New York right now, you can think of your friends in New York, you can think of the yellow taxis in New York, you can think of the Statue of Liberty. It's happening. It's happening right now. But you're not there. You're not there to experience it. But you can have kind of a certain amount of confidence that New York is happening. The future and the past is just like that. It's both happening right now. So when you take this quantum time perspective, I believe it can take us out of the bubble that we're in right now, out of the myopic sense of this is the only time we have. And it can give us a new sense of perspective from which we can get a new dimension of thinking. And, to quote Einstein again, I think this was what Einstein was getting at when he said, you don't solve problems with the same level of thinking that created them, or often it's quoted, you don't solve problems with the same level of consciousness that created them. What I think Einstein was getting at here was dimensional thinking. If you approach problems in the world from a 3-dimensional perspective, it's very hard to see beyond the current confines of the system. But if you introduce a new dimension, the 4th dimension, and ultimately you can introduce other dimensions too, because there's 12 dimensions going up, but the 4th dimension is the next one. When we introduce the time dimension, and we introduce the past, the present, and the future in our thinking of how we tackle our planetary challenges, it's a bit like seeing a Rubik's Cube, where what we're currently doing is trying to solve this really complex challenge of how we transform our world such that we don't extinguish ourselves before it's too late. And the climate crisis and many, many other aspects that we could bring in, just injustice broadly. It's a bit like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube by only looking at one face of it. That's like the 3-dimensional view. We're only stuck in the present. And good luck in solving the Rubik's Cube. It's impossible. to solve a Rubik's Cube by looking at one face. You need to be able to look over the edge to the other side of the Rubik's Cube to see the perspective, the kind of hindsight futurism, I like to call it, where you can see the other colors, the other faces. And here, what I mean by this metaphor, this analogy, is that the other faces of the Rubik's Cube is the past and the future. And when we can have the perspective of stepping outside of time to see a much bigger picture of seeing what the future could be and what the past has been, we can inform ourselves so that we line up the planetary Rubik's Cube so that we can actually make the choices necessary to lead to a thriving civilization in harmony with all life. So I think this is where time is a tool that most people have not considered as a design starting point. And this is one of the fundamental aspects of the United Planet hypothesis, is to say that, you know what? Reverse engineering from the future we wish to see is actually smarter than doing incremental improvements towards it. So going to the place where we've already done it, where we've been successful, and reverse engineering from there is actually way more effective than taking an extractive system that was never built for intergenerational thriving and designed for all life thriving, and then trying to incrementally improve that into something that would actually work for all life. And so it's a bit like, in Ready Player One, where the way to win the game was to go in reverse. It's not obvious to people. It's like when you see it, you get it. But it's kind of like a spell that is hiding in plain sight. And this is where I think time sovereignty and connecting people to a new relationship to time, where we can recognize that we are timeless individuals having a time-bound experience, and that we are in an experience of time, but that experience is not the full picture. When we can create an identity of what we call in the UP.Game being time sovereign, having sovereignty over time, that's where we can begin to, the foresight as well as the hindsight, to bring in the history and the future, to bring in our ancestors and our descendants. And that's something I'd love to unpack a bit more, because, we've seen humans from the beginning of time have relationships with their ancestors in a way that has been lost in society. And so what I know about quantum time is that if we can communicate with our ancestors, like every community around the planet has done since time began, if we can communicate with our ancestors, it means we can also communicate with our descendants. And that's a really interesting point, because if we can recognize that we're living in a world where our descendants have done it, we can open up channels to our seventh generation descendants in the same way as we can open up channels to our seventh generation ancestors. There is absolutely no difference if everything that ever has existed is existing. And so this is actually where I can geek out on this, where there's a concept called the noosphere. Pierre de Chardin, who's an amazing visionary, created this concept of the noosphere, which was the idea that there is a realm of collective imagination, a collective dream, a collective consciousness, if you like. And the ideas have an energetic frequency that choose people, and certain people have what I like to call noospheric pole positions. It's like a race car. They're in the front of the race because Nikola Tesla and Edison were in noospheric pole positions to invent electricity at exactly the same time. But they could not invent electricity without the idea of electricity being ready to ripen like fruit on a tree, falling into their hands because they were both in positions to receive that. And this theory explains why many of the greatest breakthroughs in human history happened in multiple locations around the world in exactly the same time, whether it be calculus, whether it be the inventions of certain aspects, whether it be like Jung and Freud working together on psychology, etc., that there is this amazing ripening of certain ideas, certain visions, if you like. And so one of my theories to explain this, the way I understand it, it's a kind of hypothesis, I guess, is that gravity is to the biosphere what intention is to the noosphere. So gravity, if you think about the way that gravity interacts with the world of matter, with the world of physical objects, and that every physical object has a gravitational field and gravitational waves that reach out beyond that object. And the bigger the object, the bigger the gravitational waves and the bigger the gravitational field of that object. In exactly the same way, in kind of law of correspondence from the Hermetic principles, exactly the same way, the idea has an intentional field, intentional waves. And every action that has ever taken place throughout space-time creates an equal and opposite reaction. Think of it like dropping a stone in a lake and those ripples reaching backwards and forwards through time. And the way I relate to this is that there are the visions of what we can be do exist on a timeline. And those actions of that transformation are rippling backwards and forwards through time. And the way I believe we read it is that our microbiome is our third ear. Our microbiome is quite literally a receiver signal for intentional waves coming backwards and forwards in time to go and tell us in the moment, you have a good gut feel about something so that you can make a choice. And this is the paradox of choice and fate. It's kind of, free will and destiny, that you can make a choice to choose that which your gut has told you is an inevitable future that has already happened. So it's this fascinating interaction. It's like the all paradoxes square here. It's this fascinating interaction where
dependent slightly on having a healthy gut.
A healthy gut, and actually, what is a healthy gut? Is I believe a healthy gut is a healthy intuition, and that I believe that the next generation that coming in, that their intuitive capacities is going up substantially. My 6-year-old daughter is unbelievably intuitive. And I'm doing everything I can to give her permission to follow that intuition. And I literally, every choice I make in life, I'm listening to my intuition. I'm listening to these waves coming, what I believe from the future, that I am serving, that I am an instrument of its creation, as all of us are. Just not so many of us have learnt to listen to our intuition through a kind of somatic sense of our body being our third ear, that we can listen to these stories. And that if we were to do that as a collective, we would unleash something so powerful. It goes way beyond our wildest imagination, because even what we're imagining right now is not even scratching at the surface of what the world could look like when we tap into our collective potential. When we can tap into our collective intelligence, because we've been so siloed and so conditioned that we can't even imagine it. Even in the game, I see people's challenges with imagining positive futures that, I see so many patterns of what people are imagining, because I've listened to now, certainly in the hundreds, if not thousands of people's visions of the future, that I see these patterns emerge that if we trusted our intuition more, if we acted on our intuition more, if we made choices that drive us towards that which our intuition is already leading us to, the speed with which the regeneration can take place will go beyond our imagination. And that's one of the reasons why in the game we chose 2030 as the goal, as the milestone. 2030 in the game isn't a date in time necessarily. It's the date we transcend time. So it's the date where we're no longer conquered by a false story of time. And this all plays together with this whole notion of the future we wish to see is quite literally working with us to create itself.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today.
What we are talking about here, that this is the time that this idea has come, and that this is actually the knowledge and the embodied wisdom that we are ready for at this moment. As you're talking about the power of being able to connect into the future and the past, it's well expressed now through many wisdom keepers that when we do our personal healing, we are healing 7 generations back and we are healing 7 generations forward. And that as we approach certain challenges that come up, if we're really able to meet them, that it shifts something throughout all these timelines. And it means that they won't even be something that is experienced by those ahead of us. And I feel like it's a really remarkable time that we are alive, because it's very different to when I think of my parents' generation. My parents are psychiatrists, my dad a Jungian analyst, and then
explains a lot.
Indian, coming from a Jain and a Hindu background, Gujarat, where Gandhi spent a lot of time. So all of those threads, and yet the density of that time didn't allow for this level of consciousness, and it's here now. And I feel a big part of it is also to do with the feminine, and how so much of this wisdom got taken down through the witch hunts all over the world, and colonization and all of these systems of oppression. And that there's something that's happening here where we're able to reclaim these aspects of ourselves in a way that isn't woo-woo and derogatory. And, that's something that has been existing in the fields. If you talk about this kind of thing,
absolutely,
that it will be judged in a certain way. And what I have experienced myself is that this is a part of our intelligence. And I was asked to write a book about intuition in 2020. And when I sat down in this treehouse that I was locked down in and asked, how can I express this? And, I don't want to write a book about oracle cards and something, but it was meant to be a beginner level, like easy to grasp book. And as I was feeling into it, what really landed for me was our intuition is simply a part of our intelligence that we haven't been taught how to use. Therefore, everything that we need to thrive in these times, it already exists. It's already here in all of us. We have all of the answers that we need, but we just don't know how to access them. And I feel that that's why being able to go on journeys and being able to speak to our ancestors and our future generations, something that I do a lot. I couldn't speak the same languages as my grandmothers and beyond. So the only way has been in a quantum way to be able to connect to that wisdom. And, it is really fun to listen into the future and to listen to the intelligence that is all around us, that is in the trees, that is in the ocean, as you would say, is there through all the Gaians that are here, past, present, and future. And so it really feels that this is where we are at now as a species, if we're willing and prepared to move beyond any fear and step into that understanding of ourselves. My favorite review for my book on Amazon was somebody that was a male name that said that they read the first 2 pages of my book and that they wanted to know about intuition and not about politics, because I had explained how we'd been severed from this intelligence. And so then threw the book in the bin. And I thought, wow, it's just so...
That's a great review.
It's a great review.
It's like, I didn't read it, I threw it in the bin and this is my review. It was like, well done.
Well done.
Yeah.
But what it spoke to in me is, this old paradigm that we're in is so scared of this intelligence.
Yeah, for sure.
Can't even get past page 2.
It's a micro to the macro of the big story. And this is where, Gandhi called my grandfather the conqueror of fear. And that to me, I spent my years unpacking what does it mean to conquer fear? Because it's not an absence of fear. It's about going through that fear. It's sometimes recognizing that fear is an appropriate response. We're living in a dangerous world. But we need to go through that fear. And when we recognize that from an energetics perspective, from a frequency perspective, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's fear. And so fear is like that absence of love. So how do we then use that technology of the heart? Because I believe, our spaceships, our bodies are the most advanced technology probably in the whole cosmos. That we are highly advanced technologies here, that we're only beginning to scratch the surface of understanding our full capacity to be applied intuitives, to be able to synchronize the intelligence of our hearts with the intelligence of our intuition. This is not taught, but this is something that I know will be absolutely taught and practiced and developed and, applied for planetary thriving. And when we do, we're not going to have the same problems that we do today. We all have different ones, but the world will look very, very, very different. Talking about communicating with your ancestors and descendants, I actually believe that our microbiome is more intelligent than we realize, that our microbiome has a different experience of time than what we do as our kind of conscious awareness. In that our microbiome has its own conscious awareness that is connected to the microbiome of all of our ancestors and all of our descendants. So that if you can think of it this way, that your gut is actually informed by a much longer experience of life than your life. That everything your ancestors have experienced, whether it be beautiful, whether it be trauma, whether it be you've experienced, my father was born in 1929 and was in the Second World War and, was a messenger boy in the Polish resistance and had a brutal war, was put in prison and starved and on the run for 2 years and had so many near misses of life. That embodied wisdom that he had from such a brutal experience, where he raised me with, Lucian, society's one missed meal from anarchy. Never underestimate how fragile our current system is. He raised me with that, both from an experience perspective, but also his microbiome has shaped my microbiome. And my microbiome has shaped my daughter's microbiome. And her children's children is shaping my microbiome. That when you start to relate to your microbiome as this much longer satellite receiver dish of intentional waves of intelligence coming from other points in time and other experiences that have happened in your ancestry or your descendant line, it completely changes the way you relate to your body. And we actually become embodied. We develop somatic practices that synchronize us. And that's something we do a lot in the game, where the intention isn't to sit around and have intellectual conversations about the future. It's about to actually feel it and be there in an embodied way. Because when our bodies feel it, our minds know no difference. Our bodies it's like watching a movie, right? When you're watching a movie, you don't tell yourself, oh, I'm watching a movie repeatedly. You're just in the movie, you're in the story. And our bodies are very easy to trick because it's actually building on 200,000 years of evolution of us as storytellers. The oral tradition, it's been called. So when you tell a story in the present sense such that you can actually be there in the story, in the scenario, your body kind of tricks you, if you like, into living that. And then very quickly you become that. So, it's like that Chinese brilliant, that be careful of your thoughts because your thoughts become your words become your actions, be careful what you think because what you think is the greatest influence on the life you will have. And the way you perceive the world has the greatest effect on what world you will live in. And this is kind of, it's been called the secret. It's been called, many people know it. It's been taught by countless wisdom traditions and indigenous communities around the world. But now we're beginning to really let it come home. And when we see that as a collective, and when we can have conscious awareness that as a collective, our mindset is our first priority from which we can transform this world. That when we're coming at it from an abundant mindset, when we're coming at it from a positive mindset, rather than, this is why I believe that so much of the climate, if you like, the climate crisis narrative is actually not as effective for transformation as what we can stand for. Because if you look at every civics movement of the past, what we stand for as a moral obligation is way more effective than standing against something. And I think this is a point that's often missed in the current meta crisis of meaning that we're in. We're clearly in this meta crisis where so many in the world have lost hope and have recognized the injustice and the cause of the extractive ways in our world. And yet we're not so good at creating the transformations that we can stand for collectively. And that's the whole intention of the UP.Game, is to say, how do we come together to birth a unifying narrative, a new identity, a planetary identity that's actually not new, it's, I believe, always is. And that anyone that can recognize that planet Earth is a whole living system that we belong to can begin to see that nations make no sense. That yes, they've served their purpose to get us to this point, but they're not guaranteed in the future. And us thinking that nations have a timeless right to exist, I think nations should only exist provided they're doing their job. And that what if we were to imagine a world where we could transcend borders and separation and failing nation states into thriving planetary nations and continents? And this is why in the game, in United Planet, I talk about the 5 C's. So you start with consciousness, and then go to communities, and then to cities, and then to continents, and then to civilizations. And then ultimately, if you want to add a 6th C, to the cosmos, because I don't believe we're the only ones in this cosmos, and that we actually have other support, whether in the energetic realms or in, whether there's, aliens coming, I don't know, but I believe we are in the most important place in the entire cosmos right now is planet Earth. And what's happening here right now is the center point. It's the midpoint. It's kind of Game of Thrones final episode. Everyone is watching the show. It's the greatest show in the cosmos of what is happening. Like, will we make it? Won't we make it? It's kind of like, the Star Wars story at the planetary scale is what's happening here on planet Earth right now. How do we make it a better story? And this is where in the United Planet, we created what we call the United Planet GPS. Number 1, make it a better game. Number 2, make it a better planet. And number 3, make it a better story. And when we recognize that the stories we tell are the front line of transformation, we can recognize that one of the most powerful points of intervention we can create is the birthing of a new story. And that there is nothing more powerful than a story whose time has come. And I think of stories as like time-traveling javelins coming from the future into the present to give us a line of sight to quite literally trapeze our way into the future with which we story. And so it is something really powerful. It's not like, oh, we're living a fairy tale, that this is some utopian strategy. No. That this is highly calculated, very intentional, where, for me, the goal is completely, without any sense of this not being feasible, is to initiate 1 billion Gaians by 2030, to transform $6 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars into stars to fund the transformations necessary to create the future where our future generations can thrive. Now, why 6 trillion? It's estimated that the SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which frankly has been, kind of the exhaust pipe of the extractive capitalist system, they're fundamentally problematic because they're getting at the symptoms, not the causes. They're great. We have a map of the world's challenges, but the Social Progress Index puts us currently on track to hit them in 2092. Like, Houston, we have a problem. We're kidding ourselves that we're actually on track to hit these global goals. People wear the badges, but they're not walking the talk. And so this was one of the reasons we started by, let's celebrate in 2030 the achievement of the global goals. And so why 6 trillion? Well, if it's estimated to cost 60 trillion to achieve the global goals, we currently have a huge funding deficit. Hence why we're currently on track to hit them in 2092. So what if we could convince billionaires, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, individual Gaians, organizations to start to commit 10% of their budgets into what we call star bonds. These are outcome-based financing, where a star bond is, imagine like a social impact bond meets a smart contract coming from the future. So it's a particular outcome saying, okay, for planetary thriving, we need to hit all of these measurable outcomes, and then we use AI to reverse engineer the pathways to actually achieve them. To say that if we can then allocate 6 trillion, what our bet is we can do what we call the Gaian benchmark. We can make it 10 times better for 1/10 of the cost, is the Gaian benchmark, by removing competition and removing the need to spend in duplicative ways, which is what the competitive market does. It makes absolutely no sense. Just take how we think about cancer, like curing cancer. There's currently like tens of thousands of organizations competing with each other to provide shareholder return, to provide philanthropy return to their investors to go and deliver on the same mission. And so, 80% plus of those resources are duplicated, marketing to the same people doing exactly the same thing. It makes absolutely no sense when you see the big picture. So then the question for star bonds and stars as a currency, as a United Planet's decentralized planetary bank, as a way to design a system of money that is programmable for value creation and for distributing value based on anybody that can contribute value to the collective goal, i.e. proving that cooperation outperforms competition. If we can go and demonstrate that by creating an outcome-based financing goal that comes from the future backwards, that we can finance ecosystemic cooperation to achieve that goal, we can run circles around the present way of creating the future we wish to see, because we're not paying for competition. So the hypothesis here, and it's a big hypothesis, it's not proven yet, but the hypothesis is, what if we could allocate funding from the future backwards? What if we were to redesign money to use the gravitational pull of that money, the ability for money speaks, right? Money moves. Money creates incentives to go and say, we're going to finance these stepping stones in the same way as the UK government created a social impact bond to say that, okay, it costs something like £250,000 for someone to come out of prison and then recommit a crime and go back into prison. That's how much it costs the UK taxpayer. So the UK government came up with a genius plan that's works really, really well to say that what we're going to do is create a social impact bond where any organization that is able to work with someone coming out of prison for more than 2 years and be in employment is going to be able to unlock this bounty, this reward, this bond of something like £100,000, where the taxpayer saves less than half the cost, the individual benefits because they end up being in long-term employment, and society benefits because there's not more crimes. The crime rates gets reduced. That's an example of a social impact bond. Now imagine doing that for every aspect of our society's transformation of like, how do we make sure there isn't more plastic than fish in the oceans by 2030? Well, we put a bond instrument on it and we say that extracting every ton of plastic from the oceans rewards this much in the star bond. And we can start to allocate financing in a way that's way more efficient. That's what we're doing in the game. So the game is a way to bring, who are the geniuses, the creators, the artists, the musicians, the storytellers, the investors, the elders that are ready to come together to commit to transforming the world and creating a place free from politics and bureaucracy and distractions and greed. And from that place, go and say, okay, what are the pathways necessary to create the future we wish to see in our visions? And from those pathways, we then are going to be training the United Planet AI, which is the first AI ever to be trained from the future, exclusively by Gaians in the game. So it's an intelligence engine that will augment the collective intelligence of every Gaian coming together to say that what we'll do is we'll use AI to design those potential pathways to experiment with, create planetary bounties tied to those pathways, and from there we can actually reverse engineer the steps. And this is a big hypothesis. It's saying like, there's a different way of financing the future we wish to see. And it's a bit like, the Ready Player One. We're doing it in reverse. We're going to fund this in reverse. And that was the way the game won. And so how we're going about this is we're starting to produce this epic products that we call dragon eggs. And a dragon egg in the game is what I describe as a fractal truth. It's pursuing truths that are true, always have been true, and always will be true. And so if we can design society as a building block on that, we can use these dragon eggs, which will be quite literally a three-dimensional products that people will have, that will have a receiver, a microphone, to receive all of the information, all of your dreams and visions and strategies and networks and suggestions will come into that collective intelligence of the United Planet AI, the Gaian AI, and it'll have a speaker. So at any point, you can interface your dragon egg with all of the intelligence of every other dragon egg on the planet. And that we can quite literally create a digital twin of the planet where anyone, anywhere in the world will be able to reimagine their world and create a vision using the metaverse. We're going to call it the Betaverse, where you can step into a real-life prototype, an immersive prototype of your vision in action. And then if other people are like, hey, I've got the same vision as you, why don't we team up together to make that vision a reality? And then investors are like, okay, there's some serious collective intelligence going in this direction. I'm going to put some capital behind that. So a city could go and say, and we're speaking with various city mayor candidates to say, why don't you put 10% of your city's budget into star bonds to go and say, let the citizens of the city reimagine the city they want to see so that they can go and create the pathways necessary to go and create that. And so this is where I think there's going to be an amazing amount of innovation that will come at the intersection of financial incentives, AI and quantum computing, and everything that allows us to utilize technology for our own transformation, plus gamification of every aspect of our world's transformation, plus a culture that is consciousness first, that is from the frequency of love first. And that when we recognize that we can create a stack, an experience that initiates people into a planetary identity and says, welcome to the team. We are on this humble, audacious mission to create a planetary civilization in harmony with all life. Welcome to the team and being part of that. I believe 1 billion people by 2030 will want to be on that team. And it will be the largest team on the planet ever to exist. And that we will have, if you like, a decentralized cooperative that will outperform any corporation, because we'll have strength in numbers where we can demonstrate that cooperation outperforms the competition. And so that's where I think there's an opportunity for us to start with the narrative, start with by gathering the storytellers, to gather those stories, to gather the upgrades and the strategies and the pathways. And from there, develop the AI to augment it. From there, develop in 2025, launch the United Planet Metaverse so that we can create immersive worlds where anybody can come and envision those futures. And then from there, create these physical products where anyone, anywhere in the world can create visions, location-based immersive experiences into those visions, where anyone with a dragon egg can go and collect other people's visions and join those teams and get to be able to benefit from the creation of those visions. And so I see this as a completely, it's a holistic vision for a different way of approaching the problem, an approach that's coming from the future. And I can't say this particular one is going to be the right one. But what we are is an experimental lab to keep trying these different solutions, to say that there needs to be big swings at the system. We need audacious missions that aren't trying to tweak something, but trying to completely reimagine it. And there needs to be many more. United Planet is an early example of this planetary strategy. And we started by creating the first ever planetary embassy in the world in San Francisco, where it was a huge success. We had in our first 8 months, over 60 clients, over 3,000 people from over 1,000 organizations come together to design positive futures. And then COVID happened. And that's what then birthed the United Planet game. So, these are the kind of experiments that we need to be doing. It's American embassies exist in capital cities all around the world, as do Chinese and Indian and British embassies. In London alone, there's over 130 national embassies, but there's no planetary embassies in the world. Why not? It's an idea hiding in plain sight. So how do we fund that into reality where we're partnering with city mayors and saying that, okay, did you know that 70% of the world's wealth sits in 40 cities? It's a hell of a lot easier to align those 40 city mayors than it is 192 nation states that can't get their shit together and are all in competition with each other in some zero-sum game that ultimately ends up in us all losing. So that's the kind of way we're thinking about this, is like, how is a completely new way of looking at planetary scale transformation? How can we do that without trying to adapt what we're currently doing, but run the system like next to it in parallel? As Bucky said, you don't change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's why when I get at the Gaian benchmark, the 10x better, 10 times better for 1/10 of the cost, that's the kind of thing that will make the existing system obsolete, because it's going to become laughable. I know that my descendants look at nation states as one of the craziest ideas that held back humanity's becoming. And so like when you can see that nation states aren't necessarily part of the solution, I'm not saying they're going to go away, but what I'm saying is that they are not up to the job. And so when you see that the current mainstream mechanisms by which we are tackling systems change are not up to the job because their very nature is not aligned with the future we're wishing to create, that's where it's like, okay, well, we need an experimental lab and we need to make sure it's well funded. And the thing that, frustrates is like so many people at the front lines of systems change are broke. They're not getting the funding they need. And that's ridiculous in a world that's at risk of extinction. It's like, how do we turn the taps on? How do we make it rain? And that's why United Planet has got this. Often people think I'm completely crazy with this when I'm saying that, no, our goal is to transform 6 trillion by 2030. And the way we did that was actually super clever. It's kind of a fun little thing to kind of go with, and we can get into some of the structures of the game, but I've been thinking about United Planet for quite a long time because I felt the UN wasn't really fit for purpose. And the UN was birthed out of the trauma of World War II. And it was birthed with good intentions and it served its role in the world, but it's been totally hijacked by bureaucracy and, it's for sale. Like so many things in our world, the UN is for sale. And the more money you put into it, the more influence you have. Just like politicians are we get the best politicians money can buy. It's essentially legalized corruption. What I realize is we need this decentralized United Planet, like a not based on nations, but a borderless vision where we're looking at the planet as a whole system. And so back when I launched United Planet on Earth Day 2020, I did this kind of fun thing where we did this festival. COVID had just begun. It was, April 20th, 2020. We only had 3 days to organize it. And we invited over 100 speakers and performers, famous bands like Gone Gone Beyond and others were there, and amazing thinkers, Charles Eisenstein and Daniel Schmachtenberg and Jamie Wheel and Amanda Sage, Amanda Gregory, like amazing people came together. And we did this lunch set in 2030 with Charles Eisenstein speaking and sharing their visions from the future. And in that lunch, I did this thing that I've been thinking about for a while on how to create an Aikido move on money itself. And I said, from the future, back on January the 1st, 2020, what we did is we pegged 1 star to $1, but we pegged it to that day, January the 1st, 2020. So the total supply of dollars, the way it's tracked is called the M2 supply. The total supply of dollars in existence was a specific number that day. The US government has got this kind of, economic opioid crisis called quantitative easing, where we were printing money quite literally like there's no tomorrow. And so what we did is we established the peg to that day, and every day going forward, we diluted the exchange rate by the increase in number of dollars printed. So today's exchange rate is $1, I think it's $1.43, $1.44 for every star. Why is that? Because like that 44 cents increase is how many dollars have been printed in the last 3 years since COVID began. And so what we've done is we've created a secure store of value that's unmessable with by any nation state. It's not controlled by any nation. It's permanently fixed in the blockchain. I don't control it. I just told the story from the future. So I'm not like responsible. It's not like I gave myself a bank of stars. I just told the story, knowing the power of the story and knowing the power of a story to transform a system. And so as the years go on, if we take out, based on the last 3 years, if we project out saying, okay, over the next 7, with current trend in quantitative easing, 1 star will be worth $3.36 by 2030. Now, if you can now go and store your money in stars and know that you're hedging against the dollar, which is essentially the petrodollar, if you can do that and you can go and utilize those stars to be put into action, into star bonds, to grow the value of your stars against both the dollar, but also grow the value in that if you're successfully investing in planetary transformation, you're getting the rewards from that, we're actually putting money into use. So rather than money sitting in banks and sitting in companies and sitting on balance sheets that isn't being put to use whilst the world is burning, it's like, how do we transform the power of that money to create an incentive field, like gravitational field, to pull the world into that which we want it to become? And so that's the kind of idea. And those are the ideas. There's like, that's one big one, but there's 1,000 of them, more than 1,000 of them coming out of United Planet. And that's where I have confidence that the stories we tell can transform our world into that which we're describing. And so it's like, we're not talking about like little ideas, like tweaking at the current system. We're talking about completely reimagining identity, money, culture, like communication, consciousness. You know, we're talking about a full holistic systems reset, reboot, where we can be our fullest best selves and rise to the finest hour.
Really is something what's possible when you ask in the future.
I believe this is the thing that works. I believe this goes all the way. You know, in that kind of Star Wars thing where you're flying through the eye of the needle, that this strategy is one that goes all the way. In that I have full confidence that in 77 generations right now, we're still celebrating a united planet, and that we are still playing a game to become our best selves. That it doesn't end. It quite literally is the infinite game. And it's for that reason that the game follows the Fibonacci sequence. So every year, the number of games we've done has followed the Fibonacci sequence. So this year, we're on 8. Next year, it's 13. The year after, it's 21. In 2029, it's 144. In 2039, it's 17,774. So the way that we're rolling out the game and distributing stars to everybody that plays the game is the infinite game, because the Fibonacci sequence is the closest thing we can get to the practice of experiencing infinity and the pursuit of infinity, which I think is like, again, I talked about as above and so below. How do we create a game that is in itself a fractal of reality itself? It is a micro to the macro of reality itself. And it's from that place that we can play with the conditions to be able to create the experiments that can show us the pathways, kind of leave the cookie trails for planetary thriving, and not compromise, not compromise any aspect of this. United Planet is not for sale. It's uncorruptible. It's not a company. It's everybody that comes into the game becomes a citizen of United Planet and becomes a co-creator, a curator. And that's one of the reasons why I never called myself the founder of United Planet. So I see myself as a founding curator. I know the historic importance of what I'm doing and my role in it. And that's something that I hold with kind of humble audacity. I know what I'm doing and what role I'm playing, but I also know your role and other roles, and I see it. And the more I can remember the future and listen to my intuition and find the others, the more I see that this is truly like birds of a feather flock together. It's like a toroidal field of souls finding each other to this perfect moment, this 0 point of coherence where we get the job done.
It's mind-blowing. It's fascinating. And I feel it in the cells of my body. And as you were talking way back about the microbiome and the soil and the vertical axis of ancestry, as you were saying it, I could also see this horizontal axis of like every place that we go to, of how that changes the soil and it expands our capacity into planetary imagination.
Totally.
And then that really, lands me into this like, well, it's incredible that you're hosting the games in all these different places. And yet it does speak a little bit to this kind of privilege of like those that can travel, those that are like nomadic, that are digital nomads, that are, running these different companies, and how then to make the games also grounded and diverse and like open.
I care about it so much that from the structure of the games, I created 4 tiers. So the way we finance the games is what people pay to contribute is like an investment in the DAOs. They get stars back for contribution. And there's 4 levels. So 50% of people are on scholarship. They're paying less than it costs to create the game. And last year I had 25% of everybody that came was on full scholarship. That ended up being entirely paid by me. And so I didn't pay myself anything last year. I just spent quite a lot of capital on getting people that I know needed to be in the games to improve diversity, to basically make sure that this wasn't just like rich, privileged kids. But at the same time, I recognize that we're doing games all around the world and there's travel necessary with that. Part of the way we handle that is the goal is to have at least 12 of the 48 people be local participants that are living in the local area. Sometimes that's easier said than done, particularly when it's been predominantly my network. As good a job as a white privileged male can consciously do of trying to make this as diverse as my network would allow. I spend a lot of time attempting to bring more diversity into the game. And so I would say I'm conscious of it and certainly pursuing it. But the future of the game isn't going to require people traveling to locations. We're not going to have 1 billion people playing the game in person in locations. The idea is a bit like what the Greeks were relating to with the Eleusinian mysteries, that the game is a way for the athletes of transformation to come together, the Premier League, how do we turn systems change into a sport where the Olympians are coming together to envision, but anybody can play the sport. So it's like, this is like the football Premier League, the in-person games that we have in locations around the world. But the metaverse, the United Planet Betaverse, can be played by anyone, anywhere in the world without travel, without cost. So I'm not creating this as a business, in a kind of classic sense. Yes, it needs to be regenerative and it can't have me subsidizing everything, which, I haven't paid myself since 2018. I kind of I inherited some money from when my mother died and my stepmother died 2 weeks later. I inherited some money that my father had set aside for her care costs for the rest of her life. So I kind of related to it in that it wasn't my money and that I was going to use that money. It gave me a position of privilege to be able to use that money to go and invest into researching what could actually go all the way and kind of set out with that intention. So what I'd say is that if anybody is listening to this that knows a Gaian, please invite them to apply. It's up.game/apply. I would invite as much diversity as possible, both from, diversity in every sense of the word. The goal is to go beyond my network. And so what we do is every Gaian that comes into the game is invited to be a curator of other Gaians. And so we're just spreading that way and we're finding the others that way, because I've got a superpower, if you like, of being extremely well connected. I've been to Davos every year since 2008. I've been mapping various networks. I helped launch One Young World, the world's largest youth leadership summit. And I've been a member of many different communities and spent 10 years designing many hundreds of communities. So I've got a broad network, more so than, I would say most humans, in that, according to the World Economic Forum, I'm the most connected person in the community. So I used that privilege and that opportunity to create the games and to invite young global leaders, as well as like YPO and Summit and all these different communities that I've been tracking. Because, you know, for about 20 years, I've been tracking the people that I think are at the forefront of systems change. And so inviting them into the game to create an experience in a beautiful location in the world with like the most epic chefs and, you know, incredible experiences where we're sailing and climbing volcanoes and going into costs money. And so the way I've been looking at it is we're not going to go and promise shareholder return. What we're going to do is use each game as a way to say we need to create a regenerative experience that covers its costs. But then we're going to use that game as a way to raise money for the projects and the people that are coming together inside those games. And so, you know, there is a plan there. There is a lot of thought there. And at the same time, I recognize my own individual limitation and how much, you know, ultimately my network is only as wide as that network. But fortunately now there's 300 other people that have been through the game that have got a much bigger collective network. And now it's about empowering every one of those people to feel part of something so that they can curate their friends, and participating in any invitation for podcasts, of interviews, and saying, look, I believe in this. I believe this works. And I believe this experience. I've seen enough people go through the game, and enough people have described it as one of the most life-changing experiences of their life, that I know that this is powerful technology, just kind of social, cultural, and spiritual technology that should get into that minds, hearts, and souls of as many people as possible. And so that's kind of how we're going about it. And now we're in talks with all manner of organizations. So many organizations are now speaking to us about, can we create a game for them? You know, cities, like we're in a conversation with a number of people in Dubai around, you know, could we bring together the Minister of the Future, the Minister of Happiness, the Minister of Interior to go and say, why don't we create a game to design what does Dubai look like when its 70-year vision has been achieved? You know, just here there was an invitation to say, what if we were to create a game around the moving of the capital city of Indonesia to the Borneo rainforest, which is a kind of questionable decision. What if we were to create a game to envision that? So invitations are coming everywhere, way more than I can handle. And so we're now at the point of saying, okay, that we've got something big here. So how do we scale the organization? And scale, by organization, I mean, like quite literally the way we organize, the way the DAO organizes, because the whole of United Planet is a decentralized organization created by everybody that plays the game. And so I'm still like the one that's birthed the original egg. But the idea now is this becomes a community co-creation for all of us.
It's a really powerful vision, and it's a really beautiful invitation.
Yeah, I believe so. And I wish for people to see that, you know, this interview has been great because I rarely get the opportunity to share this level of the detail of like how we're thinking. Because often people, they'll hear game and they'll judge a book by a cover being like, I'm not a gamer. You're like, this isn't the game you might think it is. You know, this is a game of reality, to recognize that we're living in an infinite game, but we've been conditioned and trained to live within a finite game. So we've got to change the rules of the game, and we've got to up our game, you know? And so that's why recognizing that the transformation that just by playing a game has on people, it opens up their neural pathways, it synchronizes their left and right brain, it opens up their kind of neuroplasticity, opens up their awareness and their kind of openness, if you like, to imagine something better. And that is actually puts people in a better state of co-creation than sitting in a boardroom discussing what the strategy might be.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, it's an invitation to loosen up in all of the ways. And there are so many studies around play and how much more effective that is in changing behavior.
Yeah.
The amount of repetitions, I think it's something like 10 or 20 through play compared to 700-800
Right.
in a more serious way of learning.
Yeah.
And so actually inviting us to step into the challenges that we are living amongst, but really with more of ourselves than is ever given space for in those
cockpits that we have.
Yeah. I've been in many of those rooms. I've been on various global agenda councils, the World Economic Forum. I'm a young global leader with the forum. So I've been to, it's probably approaching 100 World Economic Forum gatherings, but also COP and UN. And, my fiance runs Leaders on Purpose, which is all around how do we transform from profit first to purpose first. And she works with the, largest organizations on the planet around shifting their whole strategy into purpose. So, we're like well-informed around what is working and what isn't working. I think you need to be that when you're designing for systems change. There's very few people that have been educated in designing for systems change, and we desperately need it. We need more systems change, like architects of the future, and people to feel empowered and to recognize their role in that, and to recognize that you can live your life as a great ancestor to the future right now and make an active choice every day to be that. To hold it also with humility. It's this constant dance for me personally, which is like, I'm aware of the mission, and at the same time, not to let it get to my own ego that will become a hijack of the mission. And so I love this story of a parable of, imagine yourself to be a donkey, and you're a pretty famous donkey, and you're walking into Jerusalem and the crowds are cheering you. And they're even putting palms down in front of your hooves. And you've got your donkey swagger on, and you're like, I'm the most famous donkey ever to live. Look at me, they love me, they love me. It's kind of like the donkey from Shrek. Inflating your ego, like, they love me. And the moral of the parable is, don't be an ass. What the crowds are cheering is Christ riding on our backs. And by Christ, I mean the kind of Christ consciousness riding on our backs. The ideas have agency, and they have a currency that choose people. And it's important not to let your ego get confused with the idea it represents. And so I think of myself as the humble donkey. Like, I'm recognize how significant the idea riding on my back is. And my goal is to serve that with humble audacity, but not confuse it as my idea. Hence why I don't call myself the founder. Hence why I didn't create this as a company and give myself the shares. I don't see it that way. I see this as spirit or collective intelligence, collective consciousness working through me, but also working through every single person that comes through the game. And so, yes, I've got an important role in its birthing. And every day I kind of step into that role. And it's not easy. It's like by no means, it's by no means a kind of, and I don't always get it right. But the awareness is there. It's how can we recognize that and have childlike faith that we have played a role in transforming this world into the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, while still being a very flawed, traumatized human being.
I have to say, what I've witnessed during these games is that you really do embody what you're saying here, that every single Gaian that turns up to the games has an important role to play. And I've really witnessed you give space and check in with people and encourage people individually in quite actually an extraordinary way with a group the size 48. And I believe that that's where a lot of the empowerment and the medicine of it is, that everyone steps out of the actual game experience with a deeper sense of their own purpose and what it is that they can contribute and what it is that they're already holding that is a vital piece of this puzzle that we have to be putting together.
I really care. And, in a game, I will often I'll sacrifice myself for that intention. I joke a top of the range spaceship where I can go many, many, many days with, little sleep and can, it's like when you're passionate, you can really drive through. And I channel my ancestors, I channel my descendants. I do a lot of energy work. I do a lot of prayer. And I'm very aware of the power of the game to, I observe, I kind of play games with myself in the game, which is like, how many plates can I spin and land? How many things can I execute on? And I'm like sometimes amazed at my own capacity to hold so much in the game. When I get out of the game, I'm not even close to capable of executing at that level. But I start to recognize there is a field that my whole system thrives in the game. I'm quite literally at my best self in the game, and I'm channeling my future self, which I have developed quite a relationship with. I'm kind of aware that my future self is kind of like a time traveling Jedi. So I don't know. I often wonder how I get to that role, because I'm definitely not there myself now. I'm really not. I don't want anyone to put me on a pedestal. I don't want to be a guru here. I don't want to be in any way like, I'm Lucian. I want to be seen as like an adult child who recognize the power of showing up with childlike faith in this transformation. I'm not different. I'm not special. I connect dots. I applied a lot of my privilege to be able to get into this place. I don't want to be seen as the leader. By no means. I know the dangers of that. And so it really matters to me. This is the reason why we don't have any VIPs. There's no speakers and everybody else. There's no sense of like, you go to any conference and there's the speaker's room and then there's everybody else. It's like everyone in the game is on a team, including myself. So I will always be on a team. I'm typically on the air team, and I'll always play a role on that team. And actually, I've not ever had an assistant intentionally, because I wanted to get to game 10 without having any additional people supporting, such that the emergent field had to take place. It's like I can see the more organizational infrastructure that we have in the game, the more people will default into what they've been conditioned to as a normal experience, where if you go on a retreat, you look to the retreat leaders to tell you what to do. You look to the conference to tell you what to do. We don't want that in the game. We want a space of emergence where everybody feels empowered to be a co-creator of the experience. And that's why this is a team sport. We have Time Day, then we have the water team, which is all about community and belonging. We celebrate community abundance, the wealthy commons, infrastructure transformation. We celebrate regenerative cities. So it's everything about place and belonging and the rise of community. The fire team is all about conscious culture and the transformation of society and the economy, starting with culture. And so we're celebrating gender harmony, peace and justice, thriving for all, and circular economies. And the fire team is 12 people creating experiences around their visions for that. The air team, which I'm on the air team and a member of the Air League, is all about how all life realized our fullest potential, how we really stepped into this new kind of epoch, this new realm of collective consciousness where we rose to our collective potential. And so it relates to everything to do with our food and our water and our health and wellness and our healing and our wholeness, and everything that relates to the realization of our fullest potential. So everything for future education and learning is in the air team. And then finally, there's the earth team, which, as you can imagine, is all about planetary thriving. So it's all about land and ocean stewardship. It's about ubiquitous energy. How do we transform ourselves from extracting death from the planet and putting it into the air into a ubiquitous, clean and abundant energy, so that we can really realize our future potential? Because if you look in the cosmos, energy is everywhere. Energy is like, this is what Nikola Tesla knew. And this is what I know when we get the other side of the energy scarcity complex that is a much financed agenda in our current world. When we get the other side of that and energy is abundant and clean, what we're capable of will blow people's minds. Like, they can't even imagine it right now. And I feel I get to see further ahead than most people because I'm listening to so many people's visions of the future. If I've got one message to your listeners, it's like, have more faith. Like, this is possible. I see so much possibility. I see so much intelligence that is like, wow, we're doing better than we realize. There is more solutions. There is more intentions. There is more capital coming towards this meta crisis than most are aware of. And it is possible that this isn't a utopian dream, that this is a highly grounded, collective intelligence informed planetary mission that is bound for success.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Can you ground us just into a moment of 2030?
Yeah, well, so, the way I love to do this is, 2030, as much as it's a date on the Gregorian calendar, which isn't based on truth either, 2030 is the time that we've transcended time. So we've recognized our sovereignty over time, and we have a new relationship to time that includes, in the United Planet Metaverse, we have ancestor mode and descendant mode. So we can go and live our lives as our ancestors and our descendants in as much as we can synchronize our being, so that I can quite literally see and feel everything you're seeing and feeling if you give me permission to. So we can have like full empathy, exchange of emotions and sensations and visions, etc. But we're living in a world where we've returned to community. We've recognized that Maslow was wrong in the hierarchy of needs. At every point in that pyramid is a need for community. And we flipped the hierarchy of needs from the majority being about self-actualization. We've completely eradicated poverty. We have museums of poverty. We've eradicated this notion of like for-profit pharmaceutical companies making money out of epidemics. We've created a planetary commons because we recognize that the commons, just like the village well, is a sensible way of distributing value and access to education, healthcare, food, water. Those are basic Gaian rights that we've designed our world for. We've applied quantum computing and AI in the commons. So we've eradicated the pursuit of extractive profits using the technologies that could have the power to destroy us. And then we've completely rebalanced our relationship to gender. So we recognize the trauma that was created by this age of patriarchy, by the age of the male-dominated world of separation, and we've restored our right relationship to the feminine and the balance between the genders, and that everywhere in nature celebrates the feminine, it celebrates the mother. And so we've got a completely new relationship to gender and sexuality and sexual identity, and we're wired very differently, and we kind of like look back on ourselves as like a little archaic. It's a bit like, how we look back on the slave trade. We're like, that was just barbaric. Like, how did we accept that? But except the slave trade was so much long ago. Now it just changed so quickly. Like, culture rapidly moved. And that, the notion of nations being at war, that Russia could invade Ukraine and just do that in a world, like, completely unacceptable. So we completely transformed culture. We went from like billionaires to billions of heirs. So we completely transformed the distribution of like ownership and value in our world. We live now in a world that is designed from every aspect for thriving for all. So everything we're thinking about, the best people in the world are not applying their brilliance to make the rich richer. They're designing a world for the thriving of all, for multiple generations. And that is where we're applying our capital and incentives, because we know the power of incentives. We know that humans are driven by incentives. And so we've recognized waste, and that we've recognized the toxic nature of our waste in our worlds. Now trash sites, what used to be called, dumping trash grounds, are more valuable than real estate, because there's so much value there under the ground to transform back into the circular economy. So every aspect of our world is circular. We don't waste. And organizations can't produce virgin plastics, for example. The cost of them going into the oceans and the environment is more expensive than the money they can make from selling them. So they just went out of business. So there's, we've designed our world so that we don't have, unpriced externalities. I mean, that whole thing is completely ridiculous now, that we actually lived in a world where you could, just pollute into the river and have, Mother Nature pay the price. And so that's now completely eradicated. I guess, one of the most important aspects that was a real tipping point in our transformation was when we tapped into our collective intelligence, and when we actually acknowledged that we weren't individuals competing with each other for jobs, but we were actually all on the same mission, and that we had new technologies to power the unleashing of the collective intelligence. And we realized that it was going to take all of us or none of us, and that this was an extinction level event, that we needed to all be on this together. And whilst the politicians back in the early 20s were creating narratives of us and them and a separation, we realized that that was just immature and idiotic. And we grew beyond it. We're more mature. We've recognized that we're on one team, and that we've developed a beautiful planetary identity, that we are first and foremost Gaian. And then, yes, we have our identities of our nations, of where we might be, but those nations are not the forefront of the way we operate the world. People are more loyal to their city and that where they live than their nation. Nations have kind of been recognized as like one of the reasons we had such a predominant and profound age of separation. And so the other thing is we've gone local with food. The idea of multinational conglomerates, like the big food companies that were mass producing artificial foods fed by fertilizers, and that's gone. Like the way we used to do factory farming, it's so barbaric and beneath us that we don't raise or treat animals like that anymore. We have like positive, we know where our food comes from. We have loving relationships with the soil. We've kind of gone back to soil and soul. And so we recognize that soil health relates to everything. We recognize that water security is a basic human right, that we had the water wars that separated so many, and that we had to transcend and recognize that we needed to completely transform our relationship to water. We also recognize the role of trauma and healing, in that we realized that there was a point in time this decade where we all needed to do trauma that wasn't just on our own behalf, or it was on behalf of the collective. And so as we lived into what Ram Dass said with we're all walking each other home, we rose to our finest hour. We integrated, we took responsibility for our own trauma. We had this meme that went through the decade of from family karma to planetary dharma, in that there was $60 trillion transitioned from one generation to the next. And amazingly, 70% of it went into the hands of women. And when you looked at the way that those women were investing that inherited capital, they were investing in planetary transformation, unlike their patriarch that they were inheriting from. And so instead of the pitchforks coming, the key holders came. And people connected the legacy of their families with the legacy of their descendants. And they recognized that the trauma that their family was part and parcel, like me being the 7th generation grandson of John Jacob Astor we became the richest family in the world for multiple generations off the back of the fur trade. I knew that it is not random that who my ancestors were, being the 7th generation grandson of Catherine the Great of Russia, that my ancestors represented the tribes of the North in the prophecy of the Hoop of all hoops, in that we connected and we living in times of the prophecies realized, and that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were the 4 directions coming together, the North, the East, the South, and the West, all coming together, the birthing of the condor, the eagle, and the quetzal coming together, and the Americas have united. We've united 88 million indigenous people through the Americas that became like the first indigenous nation. So there's so many transformations that have taken place. It's even hard to describe. Like you could go on. It's like there's just our relationship to our mother, that we have a rite of passage that connects us as Gaians, that reconnects our umbilical cord that we realized had been symbolically severed from our mother, that we realized that we were not listening to the wisdom of nature, the wisdom of Gaia. And that when we reconnected that's when we got into right relationship with all life. And that's where we became land stewards, ocean stewards. And we completely redesigned what ownership meant, in that we transitioned from ownership to stewardship. And then there was the energy transformation, when we began to create free energy. That just changed everything, because suddenly we had access to ubiquitous financing of transformation. And we created what we described as planetary tenure at the time, where an entire generation, the regeneration, was liberated from running in the rat race and doing jobs they don't enjoy to just make a living and just to get by. They were liberated to create value on the behalf of all life. And so we transformed every aspect of the way we think about our relationship to the planet and our relationship to all life on Earth. And it's not just us as well. It's not just the humans. We've decoded the role of the trees, the role of the bees, the role of the whales. And we recognized what role we were playing as being severely speciesist. We were so human-centric that we were blinded by our own arrogance and our own entitlement that was just now seen as completely immature. We've risen to the finest hour. We celebrate the good things in life. We don't work nearly as much. We enjoy art, we enjoy music, we enjoy food, we're connected to our food, and we are connected to each other in a way that is so much deeper, so much more at a soul level. Even the notion of religion has been a quantum jump of identity and belonging, and we've recognized our own role in, the New Testament was originally thought about as the second coming of Christ, was the umpteenth coming. It was everybody coming, the rising of the collective awareness of our own role in the transformation of society. And, it's a pretty cool place. We have a lot of fun. We've got great music. We've got great style. We dance a lot. We make love a lot. We laugh a lot. We have beautiful family relationships that we're really informed about child psychology, about, dealing with unconscious traumas that have enabled us to really celebrate the best of us. We come together, the United Planet Oath, the Gaian Oath, is something that connects us all. And, I'll finish with those words. It's that we are a united planet. I am Gaian. On my honor, I commit to a thriving civilization in harmony with all life.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I feel it in every cell of my being, and you articulate it really beautifully. I imagine that your call to action that you want to leave everyone with is to come and play the game.
I'm not everyone. There's only, if you feel it, if you feel called, it's not for everyone. It's a game to find the others. And the only way to contribute to the United Planet isn't, there's many ways to contribute other than playing a game. You don't have to travel to some location on the other side of the world. There's many ways to create the United Planet. And I would say you probably already are. You probably already are. The invitation is that vision that's in your heart for a better future. Call that vision the United Planet. Because there's something powerful when we name something. And when we recognize that we're all on one team creating something together. That's the key point, is that we're already doing it. And I think if you're listening to this, you're already deep in the trenches of transformation and you're already on the team, that we can have childlike faith that we've done it, and that might be our strategic advantage that creates that which we endeavor to realize.
Wonderful. And what's the URL and how people can connect with you?
So it's up.game, and the application is up.game/apply. And then all of the stories, we call them upgrades, that we release every day that come from the game. All of the stories are at unitedplan.et, just United Planet, because we all come from Ethiopia and there might be ETs involved. And there's 12 of us creating every team's story right now. So there's these teams of 12, which is an amazing number for how did we have a baby between spirit and sport to realize the future that was already hiding in plain sight.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.